Now with the continuation to our previous discussion, we are going to see about another one new topic. It's called artificial neural networks. Already we studied what is the perceptron and how the things are working. The same way, the artificial neural networks is also working. So when we have to be look on into the history, the research on that artificial neural networks still it's active. So for that so many problems we are using ANN to classify its boundary. And it's having that well hybrid algorithms, and we are having that good computing power to incorporate that neural information processing. So now we have to be go with that artificial neural networks, which consists of that simple processing unit, which communicate by sending the signals to each other. So over a large number of weighted connections. A set of major aspects of that artificial neural networks. It's having the parallel distributed model that's including the set of processing units. This is called their cells. In previous we studied, it is the term is called that is the perceptron, and a state of activation of every unit which equivalent to the output of the unit, and the connections between the units. Generally, each connections that has been defined by the weight, already we studied that every input it's having that appropriate weights that has to be multiplied and summed. And a propagation rule which determines the effective input of a unit from its external inputs. On an activation function that which determines the new level of activation based on the effective input and the current activation, and external input for that each unit. This method for information gathering, it's called that learning rule. How that system that has been learned, how the weight that has to be adjusted according to the required output. And environment within that system must be that operable and providing that input signals. If necessary, we have to be go with that error signals. So one ordinary computers with that neural processing networks, there is the major difference. The standard computers that's running on that one CPU, but for that neural networks we need highly parallel processing. And that standard computers having that fast processing unit, but in the neural networks they are the slow processing units because they are having that high parallel processing. And standard computers all or have that reliable units. Neural networks doesn't have that such kind of the reliable units, all they are unreliable units. The standard computers having the static infrastructure, but the neural networks is having that a dynamic infrastructure. So now we have to see about what is the purpose of that artificial neural networks, why we have to be go. So that is the two reasons behind that artificial neural networks. Number one is the technical viewpoint. There are some problems such as that character recognition or the predictions of the futures. It requires that massive parallel and adaptive processing. In that biological viewpoints, that ANN maybe replicate and simulate the components of that how the human brain, that means the perceptron, the simple neuron it's working, and how the insight into that natural information of that processing. And the artificial neural networks, the building blocks of the neural networks or the neurons, and technically it has to be referred into the units or the nodes. Basically, each neuron receives that input from many other neurons, and it changes that internal state by that activation based on the current input. Since one output signal to many other neurons, possibly including its input neurons. So in case if you are doing it, then such kind of the network is called the recurrent network. The artificial neural networks, the information is transmitted as a series of electric impulses, so called the spikes. The frequency and the phases of that spikes are encoded with that information. In biological system, the one neuron it's having the connection with that other 10,000 neurons. Usually the neurons receives the information from that other neurons in particular area. So this is called respective field. And how the ANNs are working. So the artificial neural network is either a hardware implementation or by that computer program which has that information processing, how that biological neuron is working. But that ANN it's having that greater number of interconnected artificial neurons. Each neurons has to be simplified models of their biological counterparts. So the ANN is having the technique for solving the problems by constructing the softwares that's works like our brains. So now we have to quickly see how our brain is working. So our brain it's having massive parallel information processing system. It's having that huge network of the processing elements. A brain contains the network of 100 billion of that neurons. So this is things already we saw that. The dendrites is classified for that inputs, and cell body it's for that processor, and synaptic is for that link, and axon is for that output. And a neuron is connected to that other neurons, about the 10,000 synapses, and that neurons receives the input from that other neurons. The inputs are combined. So once the input exceeds a critical level, the neurons discharge a spike, an electrical pulse that travels from the body down the axon to the next neuron. So the axon endings almost touch the dendrites or cell body of that next neuron. So the transmission of that electrical signal from one neuron to the next is affected by the neurotransmitters. So these neurotransmitters is called that the chemicals mainly by the proteins, the first neuron, and which bind to that the second. So the link is called that synapse. The strength of that signal that reaches the next neuron depends on the factors such as that the amount of neurotransmitters is available. On that continuation we have to be see how that rest of the things is working.